Today we're talking about criminals who committed truly despicable acts, but we're focusing specifically on ones from Ohio today. I'm your host James, and these are the top 10 evil people from Ohio you pray are never released. And we're starting things off with Jerenique, Cunningham, and Cleveland Jackson. On January 3rd of 2002, Jerenique Cunningham and his half-brother Cleveland Jackson committed a violent crime in Lima, Ohio. They took the lives of 3-year-old Jala Grant and 17-year-old Lanisha Williams. The victims, along with 6 others, were present at the house of a man targeted by Cunningham and Jackson for a robbery involving drugs and money. Following the robbery, Cunningham and Jackson opened fire on everyone inside the house. Tragically, Jala died while her father held her in his arms. Cunningham and Jackson also attempted to take the lives of the survivors, each of whom sustained gunshot injuries during the incident. Both Cunningham and Jackson were convicted, with Jackson receiving a death sentence. Cunningham is currently serving a life sentence. Next on the list is George Wagner IV. In April of 2016 in Pike County, Ohio, a gruesome incident took place, now known as the Pike County Massacre. 8 members of the Rodin family were tragically taken from life in 4 separate homes. The victims included 7 adults and a 16-year-old, all shot to death. In November of 2018, authorities arrested George Wagner III, his wife Angela Wagner, and their 2 sons, George Wagner IV and Edward Wagner Jr. in connection with the crimes. The family was accused of meticulously planning and executing these attacks. Their motive was believed to be centered around child custody, financial disputes, and an illegal marijuana growing operation. Next up, we have Michael Madison. So Michael Madison, born in Cleveland, Ohio in 1977, was convicted in 2016 for the deaths of 3 young women in East Cleveland, Ohio. Between 2012 and 2013, he took the lives of his victims, whose remains were discovered in various locations near his residence. Madison's arrest in 2013 followed the discovery of the first victim's body wrapped in plastic in a garage. Neighbors had noticed a foul odor coming from his property, and authorities were alerted. Their investigations continued, and this led to the identification of 2 additional victims. Police found the remains of the second victim in a weeded lot, and the third victim's body was found in a nearby abandoned house in the basement. During his trial, Madison actually smirked, causing a father of one of the victims to lunge at him in anger. Luckily, that man was released without charges. Madison was found guilty of multiple charges, including aggravated murder and kidnapping. In 2016, he was sentenced to death for his crimes. Next up on the list is Donald Hoffman. Donald Hoffman was convicted of taking the lives of 4 men over the Labor Day weekend in 2015. He was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms. The victims, Freeland Hensley, 67, Gerald Smith, 65, Billy Jack Chapman, 55, and Daryl Lewis, 65, were residents of Bucharest, Ohio. Hoffman admitted to his crimes, stating he committed the acts to fund his drug addiction. And during the slayings, Hoffman used various methods of violence. He beat Hensley with a frying pan, strangled Smith with an electrical cord, struck Smith in the head with a bottle, strangled Lewis with shoelaces, and attacked Chapman with a pry bar. Hoffman stole the victim's debit and credit cards, spending over $2,100 on drugs and cigarettes. Prosecutor revealed that Hoffman specifically targeted older men with health issues whom he knew personally. Number 6, the Downtown Posse. During the Christmas season of 1992, the Downtown Posse, led by Marvelous Keene, embarked on a brutal crime spree in Dayton, Ohio. The first victim was Joseph Wilkerson, a 34-year-old General Motors worker. The gang lured their way into his home where Wilkinson was shot. The gang then partied in his house for the next 3 days while he lay dead in a bedroom. On the same night, they took the life of 18-year-old Danita Golette, who was using a payphone. She was robbed of her belongings and lost her life despite pleading not to be harmed and cooperating as best as she could with them. The following day, the body of 19-year-old Richard Maddox, a former boyfriend of one of the gang members, was discovered. Jeffrey Wright was also shot but survived his attack, having received multiple wounds. Continuing their violent spree, the gang shot Sarah Abraham, 8-year-old mother working in a family business. Abraham succumbed to her injuries 5 days later. On December 26th, former Dayton Police Sergeant John Huber spotted a stolen car connected to the group. He arrested them, not yet aware of their involvement in everything else that had been going on. After their arrest, Laura Taylor, one of the members of the Downtown Posse, confessed to 2 more victims, the bodies of Wendy Cottrill and Marvin Washington, who were found in a gravel pit. Taylor revealed they took them out because the gang believed they might inform the police about their crimes. Marvelous Keene, the gang's leader, confessed and was sentenced to death, with his sentence being carried out back in 2009. The other 3 members received life prison sentences. Next on the list is Edward Edwards, which is just the dumbest name I've ever heard. Just laziness on his parents' behalf, but that's all this guy really deserved. Born in 1933, Edwards' criminal activities started at a young age with burglaries and frauds. He was arrested multiple times over the years for various offenses, including arson, robbery. In 1961, he was convicted of arson and spent several years in prison. After being released, though, Edwards took the lives of several people, including his own adopted son. He took the lives of 2 different couples in the 70s, and in 1992 he ended the life of his adoptive son, Donnie Boy Edwards, committing the crime for financial gain in order to collect his $250,000 life insurance policy. Edwards' crimes went undetected for many years, allowing him to continue his criminal activities, but in 2009 he was finally apprehended and charged with crimes he committed decades earlier. He was linked to the crimes through advancements in forensic technology and DNA evidence. Ariel Castro. Castro was born in Puerto Rico, but he moved to Cleveland, Ohio with his mother when he was young, and this is where he would grow up to commit his crimes. Castro was responsible for the abduction and imprisonment of 3 women, Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina De Jesus. These 3 women were held captive in Castro's home for about 10 years. That is crazy. One of the victims, Amanda Berry, even gave birth to her daughter during this time. They were subjected to physical and emotional torment, which included being kept in restraints, confined to a few rooms in the house. Amanda Berry managed to escape from Castro's home in May of 2013, though. Castro had left the home for the day, and she managed to catch a glimpse of his neighbors through a screen door. She screamed for help and managed to make contact with them. All 3 women were luckily rescued, as well as Berry's daughter. Castro was arrested shortly after the escape. In 2013, he was charged with multiple counts. To avoid the possibility of facing the death penalty, he later pleaded guilty to the charges, and in August 2013, Castro was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and, just because why not, he got an additional 1,000 years in prison. So yeah, safe to say he's not getting released anytime soon. Next up, we have TJ Lane. So many have heard of this case. This guy became pretty infamous for his conduct in the courtroom, where he showed absolutely zero remorse or regret for his actions, taunting the victims' families, giving the middle finger to everyone in the courtroom, and pretty astonishing, really. TJ Lane was convicted for a school shooting at Chardon High School in Ohio on February 27th of 2012. He opened fire in the school cafeteria, resulting in the deaths of 3 students and injuries to 3 others, one of which became permanently paralyzed. Lane was arrested the same day and later found guilty of multiple charges. In 2013, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Lane actually did manage to escape from prison in 2014 along with 2 other inmates. They'd used a makeshift ladder to scale a fence during recreational hours. Luckily, though, he was found later that night. He's now serving in a maximum security prison, the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility. Next up, we have Robert Berdella. Now, this guy died in 1992, so a return is highly unlikely, but he's got to be one of the worst criminals in Ohio's history, right up there with Dahmer, possibly even worse. He was born in Ohio in 1949, but his crimes were carried out in Kansas City between 1984 and 87. He was responsible for the deaths of at least 6 men. Berdella lured his victims, often vulnerable young men, to his home with promise of money or shelter, and once in his captivity, he subjected them to prolonged periods of sadistic torment. He would hold them in captivity, sometimes for as long as 6 weeks at a time, before disposing of them. His crime spree came to an end in 1988, though, when one of his victims managed to escape and alert the police. The bodies of his former victims were never found, unfortunately, but police did find journals and Berdella had written chronicling his crimes, as well as photographs and personal belongings of the victims. Berdella was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He died in prison in 1992 due to a heart attack. Finally, we have Shawn Grate, eventually being sentenced to death for his crimes, having taken the life of 5 young women. His last victim, whose real name has been kept secret, known to the public simply as Jane Doe, had met Grate at the Ashland Salvation Army Ray and Joan Kroc Corps Community Center. She viewed their relationship as purely platonic and would consistently reject his advances, but Grate managed to lure her to his home using the ruse of offering her some clothes he claimed to have for her. Once inside, though, his personality completely flipped and he attacked her. She ended up being held captive for 3 whole days. But there's a light at the end of this tunnel. She managed to find an opportunity to secretly contact the police while Grate was asleep. This led to his arrest and the end of her nightmare. And during the legal proceedings that followed, Grate was found guilty of his crimes. He's currently sitting on death row. With all that said, I've been your host, James. I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.